All right, it looks like we have Amit with us. And now to kick off the speaker series, it's a great pleasure to introduce our guest, Amit Zavery. With over 25 years of experience in the enterprise software space, Amit is a visionary and strategic leader who combines a rare mix of deep technical knowledge with proven business acumen. In his current position as VP and head of platform for Google Cloud, he has played an instrumental part in establishing the company as one of the fastest growing cloud providers in the market, growing revenue from 5.8 billion in 2018 to over 26 billion in 2022. Prior to Google, Amit was the EVP at Oracle, where he led the cloud platform with a team of over 4,500 that generated more than 6 billion in revenue. He's also on the board of Broadridge, the leading provider of technology-driven solutions for capital market firms, and holds engineering degrees from Carnegie Mellon and the University of Texas. His career is a testament to his expertise and visionary leadership in the ever-evolving landscape of enterprise software, and we are fortunate to have him with us today. Please join me in welcoming Amit Zavery.
Hey, Mike, thanks for the introduction. Really nice of you to say all this, but thank you. Great to get to be on this.
We're absolutely thrilled to have you with us, and we're going to just dive right into questions. And I'll say I've got a prepared set of questions, but for the audience, we'll be addressing your questions as well. So as they come to mind, please drop them in chat. And as we get further into this, we'll be taking those questions. Thanks. So, and then what I didn't mention in the intro is that you've been a founder and can relate with this audience. Let's kick things off by hearing about your journey from the early days and how you engage with the startup community in your role at Google Cloud.
Yeah, no, great to be on this and listen and hear from many of the founders. I have done a startup myself, which we landed up fortunately selling to another company many years ago in the .com era. And I've been also a big angel investor. So I've invested in many startups in the seed rounds. And second thing I've done also during my work at Oracle and now, of course, at Google Cloud, I've worked with many companies which we have acquired. So I've acquired more than 50 plus companies throughout my career. And I've seen every size of companies. I've dealt with these startups as well as public companies. So gone through the journey of finding the right companies to buy as well as figuring out how to integrate them. So I had a lot of those opportunities during my career as a founder, as well as investor, and as an acquirer from that perspective. And the other part I do is, as part of Google Cloud, is that I work very closely with the startup community, specifically in terms of helping them adopt GCP and our Google offerings, as well as providing them all the support they need as they kind of grow through the different phases of their kind of portfolio and everything else. So how we integrate, how would we work with them, provide them support, but also kind of go to market in many cases as well, jointly. So a lot of those different touch points have been happening, and I've been fortunate enough to work with a lot of excellent founders and engineers and go-to-market folks, which we learn a lot from, as well as we figure out how we can work jointly to can help them grow as well. So it's been a great journey in that regards.
Fantastic. The theme for Launchable is generative apps. And all the startup founders participating are leveraging LLMs in their products in different ways. So in your role at Google, how are you seeing generative AI having an impact on innovation, both internally and with your customers?
No, I think generative AI, everybody's been hearing about it for the last year plus for sure, it is a transformational technology, right? I think at Google, we've been fortunate enough that we've been investing in AI and Gen AI for many years. We have thousands and thousands of engineers who've been building this technology. And we've been able to see the power of what is possible for some time already. I think the part which is now starting to happen in the market now is the productization of a lot of this technology is happening. And that changes the game pretty much. I think the way we look at it inside Google is that it is a pervasive capability, just like cloud was 10, 15 years ago, where everybody eventually started building on the cloud and adopting it, and it changed how you build and deliver different applications to customers. I think Gen AI changes similarly what you would do in an application. So we're doing that in many ways inside our product portfolio. If you look at what we're offering as a foundational piece being the infrastructure piece, where how do you kind of run your models effectively, as well as do it in a way which is cost effective, but also very productive to you. So providing the building block from the infrastructure perspective, and be it through GPUs and TPUs from our side, and then providing the different models to run on that, right? So that's already happening through our Vertex AI APIs, which we provide, Vertex AI with APIs we provide for people to build on top of it. Second thing we're doing is also making sure that we have taking the power of Gen AI and building it into our cloud offerings, be it GCP, but also a workspace. So be able to make sure you're productive and be able to now do things much better than you could do before. So improving productivity as well as the ability to really run your business effectively, right? So I think for startups today, it's a really great time where you can take some of the models available today. It doesn't have to be Google only. There are tons of them available, be it open source, provide also a lot of third party today. And our view from Google is that we want to make sure we are open provider of services in this area. So we host not just Google models, but we also host models from Anthropic, from Cohere, from a lot of open source, as well as from Meta, for example, Llama in our Vertex interface. So I can provide one interface and you can use different models for different use cases depending on your needs. And the startups now can take those things and take advantage of it into their applications. So they don't have to put a lot of investment, because a lot of these models have been, it takes billions of dollars to train them sometimes. It's a lot of work which happens from the data access perspective, using all those things to build out these models. So now the Gen AI startups can really build their applications using these capabilities easily, quickly through APIs, and now mix and match things based on what they need and really solve the critical business problems they might be doing in their domain, in their industry, or maybe in the particular functional areas, maybe for marketing or for support, or maybe it for finance automation, those kind of things. So there are a lot of this capabilities now available as a foundational building block. And we're seeing a lot of that advantage even internally at Google, where we're using some of these things to improve our marketing efforts, our sales efforts, right? And there are a lot of good ROI available now using these capabilities. And I would expect that's probably what you're going to hear over the next couple of days when you guys go through your pitch days and other things. There are so many great innovative ideas, but the good thing is that a lot of good building blocks available now for those startups to use and not have to start from scratch in many cases.
Such a great point, and to build on that, just to get your thinking on where startups should focus. I mean, from a horizontal versus vertical, where in the stack from an infrastructure to apps, how would you, from your perspective and thinking about what you're building at Google and in the capabilities that you're unlocking for startups, where would you suggest startups focus in building out differentiated capabilities, a differentiated mode over time?
Yeah, no, I think, of course, there is opportunity all the way from infrastructure to the high-end apps, right? You can go through the whole layers of what you could do as a startup. I think the reality is that if you want to be now in a core horizontal model development business, it's a very expensive and going to be hard to kind of provide a lot of value add, because there are tons of open source models as well as a lot of models provided by hyperscalers like Google, but also specialized companies like Cohere and Anthropics of the world, right? So it's a harder one. There could be an opportunity for startups to kind of build some verticalization of those models, which is happening. Like, for example, we do at Google, we do provide a MedPalm as one of the models for medical and healthcare industry, right? We do SecPalm for security specific horizontal use cases as well. There are tons of other things out there as well. I think the value we're seeing, and when a lot of companies we talk to, be it enterprises or startups, is to be able to provide a business kind of application kind of offering, which takes a lot of these models and improves the business process, which is a lot of companies need today, or be able to provide a lot of better ways for accessing data, be able to use that to get insights. And that the use cases are immense. And every company I talk to nowadays, CIOs or CEOs and CFOs, they are now looking for providers or vendors who can give them that capabilities and improve their business outcomes, because everybody's trying to save money, but also trying to make their business efficient and make their business processes better as the way they operate today, right? So as a startup, if you can really solve those problems in a better way, improve sales automation, improve marketing, improve finance, improve procurement, I think there is definitely money out there to be spent on that area. Of course, if you have a deep pockets and you have raised a lot of money, you can always go and build a lot of the foundational pieces, improve infrastructure, maybe build the next chipset, which can maybe make easier to compete against, find more capabilities other than just NVIDIA providing it in many cases, right? So there might be those things, but those are going to be far in between versus really the business value is going to be in the app space and providing very specialized capabilities to solve specific business problems.
Just to, and to keep going on that front, are there any verticals in particular you think are interesting that need attention?
I think if you look at it by industry specifically, I mean, I think definitely we're seeing a lot of interesting use cases emerging in financial services, healthcare, no doubt. Healthcare is always tricky, you know, it's a hit or miss. It's not easy to get into that space, and everybody has very specific use cases and needs. But if you can solve a very good areas of problems over there, I think there's a huge amount of business to be had. I think we're seeing a lot of things around telecommunication or any service industry where there's a customer service associated with that. Right, the old days of chatbots and what we can do with Gen AI is night and day, right? And you are able to provide customers a lot more personalized information, but also relationship, which can be done through generative AI-based chatbots. Which maybe is more conversational AI than chatbot really, and now you have very specific ability to provide that. So I think that a lot of industries like that, we're seeing a lot of use cases now emerge around supply chain and optimizing your routing and be able to provide that through Gen AI as well. So I think that a lot of those things which are emerging, and I can definitely see that becoming the kind of the next killer applications.
Great. And before we shift gears, I have another kind of line of questions here, but before we shift gears, I want to make sure and get this one out there. I mean, how can startups with limited resources leverage Google Cloud's AI capabilities? And are there any specific use cases or success stories where AI played a pivotal role in a startup's success using Google Cloud?
Yeah, no, I think we've been very focused on making sure we can provide a lot of value add to startups, right? Today, if you look at the numbers, and we publicly announced them, right? 50% of publicly funded Gen AI companies run GCP today. So, which is a big number. 50% of all Gen AI companies, funded companies, are on GCP. 75% of Gen AI unicorns are on GCP. So we have been able to cater and provide a lot of value to customers. And we also have programs, for example, we provide $350,000 worth of credits for over 2 years to Gen AI startups. So we do have an opportunity. We do believe that if we can support the early days of some of this innovative phase, that will really help the industry overall, right? So the way we provide that, one, we do provide our APIs and everything publicly available through Vertex. And that's a good value add because you can get underlying models depending on your needs, and there are multiple options available through the APIs. Second thing, we do provide enterprise search capabilities. So now you can now use our models against the data source, which most of the enterprises have very difficulty in unlocking. But through our connectors and everything else, you can use that through our Gen AI models as well for fine tuning beyond the tuning we might have done and the training we might have done. As well as we are now providing Duet AI, which is our brand for providing the collaboration and communication capabilities, as well as co-development capabilities as an assistant to any of these areas as well. Right? So those things are all available today as value add, and I think there's a tons of content available publicly on cloud.google.com. Please take a look at it, and we are open to any suggestions and ideas everybody has. So again, this is going to be a longer term kind of work happening between companies, and we are definitely there for the long term, and we'll make sure that you can have all the support you need as a startup.
That's great. That's great. So now coming back to your background, which spans all stages of kind of the startup experience, from founder to investor to acquisition, as we talked about, you know, clearly the founders that are participating in this event are doing so with an eye towards raising capital in the near term, right? I mean, they're focused on customer, they're focused on product and technology first and foremost, in building conviction, but really ultimately, you know, to get their companies to the next stage, it'll be about raising money. What advice do you have for those founders on the current capital market and fundraising in general?
Yeah, I think what I have seen over time, no doubt, having a very good team who has the big background experience speaks volume, especially at the early stage, right? I mean, a lot of times you're going to pivot. What you start with today is not what you're going to end up with over the next 5 years, right? So you definitely need to make sure that you have a very good building block and team which can really stand out. And that's what usually when I invest, or I know a lot of, I'm sure you guys have a lot of experience you can speak from about what kind of things work. But having a solid, good building foundational team makes a huge difference. Second, I think, of course, a technology which is going to be differentiated in some way or shape or form. It doesn't have to be technology for technology's sake, but figuring out the right kind of stack you're going to use to innovate faster and deliver things quickly, right? So that your customers, you can now update and provide features and capabilities faster, get feedback from them faster as well, so that you can really evolve your product line quickly is going to be important. And third thing, I think, is really finding some good sounding boards in terms of customers and advisors who can really provide feedback to the company on a regular basis, so that you can know whether you're on the right track and delivering the right kind of capabilities, which can be monetizable. I mean, I think the consumer space is very different. The monetization happens very differently when you talk about some of the things. But enterprise space eventually has to be somewhere where customers are willing to pay. So be able to figure that out. What will they pay for? What is the value you're going to provide? And how you're going to charge them? And how you're going to make money on it, right? And a lot of times when I at least talk to startups, I do want to hear that vision, like figure out how you're going to be able to deliver long-term value, and can this be monetizable? Are the people willing to pay? And if you find a few of the customers early on who are willing to pay, you know you're on the right path in many cases. And then, of course, the scale becomes important, and that's where you're going to have a good an important thing to really have a good go-to-market teams around you over time. But having a good core engineering team to start off, and then having somebody who thinks business associated with that, does make a huge difference.
Those are great points, totally aligned. To build on the point around differentiation, can you speak at all around data as a competitive advantage and moat over time? That's a theme here. Our team has curated vertical data sets for founders, and there's a big emphasis on building data flywheels and differentiation to stand out from the rest. Curious if you have thoughts on that topic.
No, I think data is the kind of the biggest piece which makes a difference nowadays, right? I mean, of course, they're going to be all technology going to build on top of it, what to do with the data, but without a set of data as well as ability to collect information properly. And I think in enterprise space, there's of course a lot of regulations and things you have to deal with, right? So compliance, the things, privacy, the country-specific regulations as well, sovereignty, data residency. But if you can solve those problems and work with the right kind of partner, be Google or others who can really guarantee you those kind of things, be able to bring in the data and be able to make the most sense out of it through some of these models or things you build, I think is really where the value changes for the provider, right? The ability to have an application which is able to make more sense out of information you collect, and then be able to bring information from various sources as well, right? So connectivity and real-time basis of it and completeness becomes very, very important, right? And I think a lot of applications nowadays, of course, are data-oriented, but be able to now understand what important things you have from there, and how do you now help enterprises unlock the value in the data they might versus the things you might already have in your particular application as well. And no doubt is a big area. I think that associated with that nowadays is the security piece of it, right? And I'm seeing a lot of questions now from every company, be it from the CIO level, but also CEO level and board level, in terms of what are you doing to protect the data, but also how are you protecting the whole application itself. So combination of cybersecurity and data, I think, is really, if you can solve that properly and you can answer that well, does differentiate you very quickly.
Such great emphasis on beyond data to even data security. It's so key, especially working with enterprise. I'm going to build on this general direction with your experience. You've acquired and integrated more than 50 companies. So you really understand this buy versus build decision that acquirers go through. What are the factors from your point of view that contribute to a successful startup exit via acquisition?
Yeah, I think from the buying perspective, I think the way we have looked at every time has been, one, are you bringing a lot more expertise than we have in-house? So you want to have a team which is coming in, which has a solid foundation and can really add value and differentiate immediately. Second, how good is the technology itself, right? Is it going to add considerable ability for us to expand the addressable market, but also allow us to now build around it? A lot of times when you're buying smaller companies, you're buying good technology, good talent, but you want to make sure that it can easily fit into the architecture, the technology you already have, so it's not like a huge amount of mismatch, which becomes very, very problematic, right? And then the third thing is always about that. Are you bringing a good know-how which will allow to attract a lot of new customers? Either they have a large customer base, or you're going to be able to attract customers through this combination of what you have organically with the inorganic piece of it through an acquisition. So I think the team, the technology differentiation, and the ability to now really have a message around it from the go-to-market perspective, kind of as a key building blocks. And there are different phases, right? Sometimes you're buying things for the technology purpose and you're going to build around it. Sometimes you're buying things that tuck in to kind of augment something existing. Sometimes you're buying a market by itself, right? To become large public companies, you might have a very large go-to-market available already with the people in the company who can help us scale out a new business segment as well. So it does differ, but every time it always starts with, is the product good enough or is amazing or not? And does it differentiate and allow us to build a bigger business around it or not, right? So it goes through those phases depending on what companies we bring in. But the cultural fit is important. The technology fit is important, because if you have to now fit a group of people who will not easily work with the existing culture you have, it becomes very tricky, because you lose a lot of people. You might not be able to retain the value you brought in from the company. And the technology, same thing. If it's legacy or old, you have to rewrite. It becomes very painful and not valuable in many cases.
Great. As a follow-up, and having gone through this experience myself, partnering with enterprise customers early and having that lead to an acquisition, this can play out over long periods of time. Curious your perspective on the right stage to start forming these relationships, how you form these relationships. Like, what have you seen in that? Because obviously these companies are early and they're thinking about where to prioritize their time. So this question of what's the right balance in all of that is so key. How would you advise startup founders in terms of where to prioritize that relationship building?
Yeah, I think you do. I mean, we at Google, we do believe that that's why we are trying to reach out to the startups to build that relationship early on. And I think startups need to do the same thing. I mean, I think you do want to build a good relationship with companies who can become your channel partner in some cases, right? Because there's no way everybody can build a large sales team. It's expensive, time consuming, and very hard to guarantee success. So you do want to develop a relationship with some area with companies who could become your go-to-market partner, technology partner, and who can take you to customers jointly in many cases, right? So reaching out and validating and building that relationship, I think is early the better. Of course, you want to have a product and which works and people want to buy and customers really care about. Of course, that things you do need to do. But as soon as you have a good sense of that and you have products which are already being used by a few customers, start building the relationship, right? And I think there are a lot of companies like Google, I know we for sure would love to have that discussions early on so that we know what you're doing, how we can jointly work together. In some cases, it doesn't lead to an acquisition if that's a goal for a company. In some cases, still, I think in this day and age, you can still survive without getting acquired in many cases, because there's the ability to really build things fast because of cloud capabilities out there, think technologies in the Gen AI available to you to start building things on very quickly. And you can have a joint solution through marketplaces and deliver things through different ways, and have a good partnership with vendors like Google and go and build that out for long term. So reaching out, building the relationship, both from the engineering and sales perspective, will be good, I think.
That's great. I've got more questions, but the questions are starting to flow from chat, so I'm going to address a few of them. We have a question that came in from Ryan. Can you provide a point of view on when a startup should move from prompt engineering to fine tuning and later to training their own models?
Yeah, I think the prompt engineering is evolving more and more to, I mean, the fine tuning everybody should be looking at, I think for sure. I think as a startup, if you have your own data set, you have your own kind of information you bring into to differentiate your application, you will still need to do some of that work, right? I think models have become much better where we are doing a lot of the pre-training, and the fine-tuning part required is very, very minimal and small, but it's still good to kind of do that. And secondary, I think in the enterprise space, a lot of times customers will have the data which is going to be only available to them. And you do want to fine tune your models to that particular use case, and it might be different for every customer. So you want your models to be able to kind of understand that and be able to keep the data secluded to that particular use case and to that customer exclusively, so you don't land up leaking things and having a lot of issues around licensing and IP and other things like that. No customer wants that data to be used with a competitor use cases either. So I think that's the important part for you to remember. I think you will have to do some of this fine tuning. Prompt engineering, you want to start doing some of that stuff, but I think over time, I'm guessing the models are getting much better at that, that you should be able to handle any of those kind of information prompts customers are putting in. And so you can't keep on training to every possible scenarios. I would expect the models to evolve to that as we go forward in the future.
That's great. We had a question come in from Ian. How do you recommend addressing concerns with creating product with the statement, oh, Google, Amazon, you name it, can just build that? I think, founders hear this out in the market. They hear it from investors. How would you advise things like that?
If that was the case, no startups would exist, right? So, I mean, if you look at, or no other companies would exist, right? So it's the same question been asked for every time, every phase of every time frame of our industry, right? It could have been for cloud, it could have been for infrastructure, it could have been for security, it could have been for data. It's the same thing with collaboration. But there are tons and tons of companies out there who do very, very important and very interesting products out there. And everything cannot be done by Google or Amazon or Microsoft. And it's true. I mean, that companies who exist today because they do provide a lot of valuable capabilities, which are not going to be provided by the hyperscalers or any other large tech companies. So I think same thing will happen in Gen AI. There's no way we as Google can do every use case and every kind of capabilities. I think the way to answer for startups is going to be that what is your differentiation from. And it doesn't have to be completely that, hey, we will do this and nobody ever can do it. It's that nobody else is doing it in some cases and we will do it better in some cases as well, right? So I think there's tons of white space available and there's huge amount of opportunity. I'm sure VCs, you all see that today. It's not like you're only investing, otherwise you would not be investing in any companies.
That's right. Yeah, no, I think you're right. As you came back to, you got to have that solid, as a founder, solid founder idea, fit story, competitive differentiation story. It all comes back to that. So I appreciate that. From Spencer, a question came in. What's your frame? How should they think about, as a founder, a framework for determining the best LLM for their product use case? Are there any guidelines in your mind and how you would think about that?
And this is a tough question. I mean, I think this question comes up with customers as well, because the choices are immense now, and it keeps on growing every day. You go to Hugging Face from open source, you look at what the hyperscalers are providing, and it's a tough one. I think the way I would look at it for the founder is, one, the use case you're solving, how much is the dependent on models, and does it matter which model you use, or are they going to be very specific verticalized or horizontal use cases some models are good at? And there's tons of information out there publicly with the companies who compare different models for different use cases. Google provides you a lot of guidance as well, because we also have multiple models, not just one model available today, right? And sometimes you might be okay with a smaller size model versus a larger one, given that it might be more expensive. So how do you reduce your cost? If you're going to be a SaaS provider, you want to reduce your infrastructure costs as much as possible, because customers are not caring what model you're using underneath. Is going to be really hidden from their perspective. And if your gross cost goes up because you're using very expensive compute or anything else, then your operating margins and other things are going to be impacted negatively. So you do need to be smart about what you need, how much value that provides versus what you're doing on top of it, and not just go for the biggest and the largest things in many cases. There might be also industry-specific things you might want to look at. As I said, we have security-specific models. We have healthcare-specific models. There are models which are coming out for different data sources, be it for consumer data or be it for financial services and other things like that. So we do have a lot of choices. I would suggest spending some time getting good technical folks to help you with that process. You can reach out to us as well. We have a lot of expertise in terms of guiding you. And it doesn't have to be only, we don't provide saying that it has to be only Google. So there we can provide you neutral information in that regards. And there are third parties out there also who can help you. But you definitely want to be smart about what you do and where the value added is going to be.
They're insightful points. It just makes me think about the level of agility founders need, because more models are emerging. You mentioned open source. It gets to a question that our MDL partner Jay brought up. I mean, he has a question around how do you see open source versus commercial LLMs space developing, and will open source models reach the same level of robustness and accuracy as current commercial models over time?
Yeah, no, I think it's going to be a very competitive environment. And I think there will be things which many vendors are also going to open source to innovate faster in some cases. There will be some good open source models out there which might be good enough for some of the use cases. I think the part which becomes tricky, especially in the enterprise space, is that how do you guarantee security? How do you guarantee updates? How do you guarantee no leakage of data? All the things are the thing which you do want to have somebody who protects you. I think the indemnification and other issues which you run into with some of this Gen AI stuff is pretty real. The IP issues are real. And how do you make sure that the models you're using is not infringing on some kind of IP, right? Are they trained properly? Are they trained on things which are not allowed to? And then you get into trouble because if you're using that in your app is liable and your customers are liable. So how do you protect your customers? If you look at some of the terms of service and the contracts nowadays, it does take a lot of effort working with enterprises in terms of getting that agreed upon, because they're worried about their data leakage, but they're also worried about any IP issues they might get sued about. So I think you do want to, as a startup, think through all those implications, especially in the market segment, depending on the segment you're going after. If you're going after large enterprises in a particular industry, you have to ensure that you are going to protect them for any issues they will face because of the product they use from you, and they are going to be willing to use it or not because of the worry they might have based on the models you're using. So if you're using some open source for experimenting might be okay. You might not be able to use some open source if they're not going to protect you in some sense from IP, or at least you have an idea of what they're training it on, and are they protected or not. So that, I think, things you have to think through for sure.
Yeah, I think I know where you're going to go with this next one, but this is a follow-on from Jay, which is, do you see a world in the future where Google open source their models?
I think if you look at what we've been pretty clear about openness in general, right? We have open source, a lot of innovation, be it Kubernetes, TensorFlow. You look at what we're doing with even transformer technology, which is, as you know, the foundation for GPT today. And there have been other things which we continue to open source, and I'm sure there will be pieces of our technology which make sense for us to open source. We will open source. I don't know which ones and what time frame, but definitely I think we have been very big contributor to the open source community, and I think that focus remains true to today as well. So,
yeah. Last in a series of questions from Jay, which I think are good ones. Where do you predict LLM capabilities will be in the next 3 to 5 years?
I think nobody can predict what's going to happen. This industry is moving faster than anybody can predict, right? I think if you look at where we were in November, where we are in this less than a year since then, I think we have come a long way. And the things which we have done, the industry has done, has been kind of breathtaking, to be honest. I think there are tons of new things you will see over the next 6 months. I think 6 months looks good enough for me to think about versus 3 years. I think the good thing which I see is that things are now settling down. There's, I think, the reality been formed as well in terms of what makes sense, and everybody is not like just running around, but I think people are starting to do real work with it, right? I think that will lead to a lot of innovative applications for sure. I think that over the next few years, for sure, to your question, Jay, I think you will see real Gen AI based application, not just be able to search information, but also be able for you to now run your business in some better way, in a much more automated way. Your workflows, your ability to make changes, your ability to bring in data from various sources and be able to now provide a lot of value to your end users, but also inside to employees and everybody else is going to be much more real. Right now, I think a lot of the applications are Q&A back and forth, and maybe some little better in some sense in terms of helping you write documents or improve your productivity. I think the bigger gain will be how do you now operate your business, not individually, but as a collective. I think today most of the use applications are a little more individualized still, and which is good. I think you want to be individualized excitement because you can see the value of it. But now, how do you do this thing from the end-to-end business perspective? I think that's where the change will be with the Gen AI. I think today there's not too many of those things happening, but that will happen for sure.
That's great. You've been so generous with your time. I'm going to do a couple more questions, and then we can wrap this session up, which has been amazing. I've got one from Amika that it's a pretty long one. I'm going to surface this one to you and see where you take it. Given your significant experience in overseeing the growth and evolution of Google Cloud's diverse services, from AI/ML to blockchain and integration, how do you envision a future role of generative AI platforms in reshaping enterprise cloud solutions? And what are the critical success factors startups should prioritize to bridge the gap between today's offerings and the demands of the future cloud ecosystem? It's a pretty good one.
Yeah, I think, as I said, Gen AI is going to become a pervasive and foundational technology. It's not just like you'll use it in a particular application, but also you will be using it in the foundational environment as well, right? So I do see cloud platforms really change how we deliver that services to our customers. So, for example, if you look at observability, like how do you know what's happening in your system? Why is it failing? How to fix it? Today, there's a lot of tools out there which can give you alerts, can give you an idea of what went wrong. You can go there and fix it. It can proactively fix few things, but not really give you a little more proper end-to-end ability to understand what's happening inside an application environment at the infrastructure level. So that's one example where Gen AI can really have a good idea of what goes wrong, why it goes wrong, how to fix it, and be able to really get you to specific issues directly through some of these capabilities now, which we also building. If you look at some of the things we announced at Google Next, is how do you make it how you make your infrastructure much more reliable and foundationally capable through Gen AI, right? I think same thing will happen across various areas. I mean, when you're building your code, you're doing analytics, you're doing security, you're doing building your APIs, whatever may be the case, building integrations. A lot of those things can now be built through Gen AI models in a much better way and can help the end user or the systems work much more effectively and save you money, save you time, but also make you much more, I would say, reliable. So I think that's what I would expect. A lot of things to happen in the cloud platform itself. And I would say the cloud ecosystem will benefit by making sure the integrations are easier, the foundational pieces are better, all those kind of things. So I do envision a lot of that things to be delivered over the next 6 to 12 months.
That's great. And a last question. So, here is a group of startup founders early in the process. Advice for them as founders and builders as they go through this journey. You've seen quite a bit of the movie per se, right? And curious what you would advise. Any last advice for them?
No, I wish you all luck. I mean, I think this is it's a great time. It's an exciting kind of capabilities available. So I would say the opportunity is immense. And I think the capabilities you can deliver is great with some of the foundational pieces. So my advice to you is, I mean, I'm glad you are doing this. This is a great time to do it. And there's a huge amount of opportunity. Customers are all eager to adopt some of these new capabilities. So there is I would say, some disruption happening for sure. This is not just me too, or like I can deliver same thing somebody else has done a little better, but this can be like 10x better, right? So if you as a founder are able to think bigger, have a vision, you have the opportunity to now execute with the technology which exists today. So I think that's a great time and a great opportunity. And then you have providers like Google and others willing to provide you some free credits if you build the right company. And you, of course, have VCs out there who are willing to invest. So you can't ask for better timing.
Awesome. This has been so great. Thank you for your depth of insight and just spending this time with us. I really appreciated your questions on use cases for LLMs and how startup founders should think about that. And the depth you went into around data modes, I really found those points in particular interesting. But what a great conversation. And we so appreciate you being with us today to kick this off.
Thank you for having me, Mike. I appreciate it.
Okay. All right.
Bye.
Okay, well, we'll give Jimmy a minute to bring up our next panelists. Looks like, oh, look at that, how fast he is. Lightning speed here, Jimmy. It's great. And I think we're probably ready to go. So I now have the pleasure of introducing our moderator for our big tech panel, Wei Gao. Wei brings over 20 years of operating leadership across product and technology to her role as venture partner at Madrona. Most recently, she was the COO at Hopin, the leading shared experiences platform that enables immersive connection from anywhere. Prior to Hopin, Wei spent nearly 16 years at Amazon, where she was VP of Amazon's grocery and served as technical advisor to Jeff Bezos. In 2019, she received the Asian American Corporate Leadership Award from the Chinese Institute of Engineers and was recognized as one of the top 50 most powerful women in tech by the National Diversity Council. I'm thrilled to work with and welcome Wei Gao to Launchable.
Thanks, Mike, for the introduction. What a fantastic conversation there between you and Amit. The theme of this year's Launchable event is Gen AI apps. And Amit just talked about what's happening at Google and answered a number of questions. I'm excited for this next 30 minutes, joined by three fantastic panelists to continue the conversation about how generative AI is already making an impact at large enterprise companies, how Gen AI is already enhancing a number of products and services and customer experiences. And some of you probably have heard many of the updates over the past months and over a year. But most recently, Amazon released a new set of Gen AI capabilities to help their sellers easily create product descriptions, titles, and listing details. Amazon also released the Gen AI capability to summarize customer reviews, making it easier for customers to really get the highlights without looking through thousands of the product reviews. Bard is now connected to Google Search and many of the Google apps and services. And Microsoft is racing to integrate OpenAI into all of their enterprise and consumer products. So with that as a context, our panel today, you're going to hear from our panelists about what's happening in their world, and then give you some ideas around, what kind of problem should you focusing on solving? How should you think about differentiating your products and innovations? And then, as Amit touched briefly, how should you think about partnering with larger companies? We have a lot to discuss, but before we get started, I will have my panelists introduce themselves. I know how uncomfortable I feel when I got introduced by someone else. So I'll have you all introduce maybe yourself individually. So why don't we start with Farah?
Hi, everyone. I'm Farah Ali. I am VP of a group called Technology Growth at Electronic Arts, a gaming company. And really excited to be here and talk about how we use AI, generative AI across interactive experiences. Particularly, one part of my group does applied research across 6 vectors, one of which is generative arts. And we definitely use a lot of AI across all of these other vectors on feature graphics, neural animation, personalized experiences. So looking forward to chat about it.
Thank you. And Brish? We can't hear you. Why don't we switch to Nancy first while you look at the setup? Nancy.
Yeah, happy to go ahead. Hey, Wei. Yeah, so like Wei, I am also an Amazon alum. I spent the last 5 years at AWS as a GM for data protection and our data security businesses. Have spent a decade thinking about how to protect data for some of the largest enterprises and government agencies out there. So for any of the founders out there who are considering those problems or thinking about starting companies in those spaces, you know where to find me. And similar to Wei, I have now made the leap onto the dark side while I brainstorm my next idea. So I'm a venture partner for Felice's Ventures.
Hi there.
Back to Brish.
Am I audible now?
Yep.
Perfect. Hi, everyone. My name is Ambrish, and I have been also leading product and technology at large and small companies over the last 20 years. AI has been a common thread across many of these experiences, starting from early days of Microsoft search and advertising, then building recommendation systems at Great Karma, and then most recently leading Facebook app monetization at Meta. Also, I've been, over the last few years involved in advising and investing in some of the early stage companies, mostly so in the fintech and AI space. Very excited for this conversation today.
Thank you all. Well, let's dive right in, and I'll start with a warm-up question. I'd like to hear from you this, the specific, like I'd like to hear from each of you, what is the overall stance of your organization on incorporating generative AI into your existing products? For example, how are you organized to do that? What is the level of urgency? How do you decide what to work on? Why don't we start with Farah?
Yeah, sure. So, as I was saying, we already have been using in gaming AI for things like, your non-playing characters or for doing dynamic difficulty in games and things like that. So it's, AI is not a new concept, but I think with generative AI, there's a lot of excitement. There is definitely, I think every company feels the tailwind, right, from AI in information work and solving sort of industry-specific problems. But I think organizationally, we believe that in gaming and interactive experiences, this space is going to reap a significant benefit because of the heavy manual lift nature of content creation work, and how well that maps into advances in generative AI. So I think the three things that get us really excited is that we have IP that's unique to us. We have talent, especially creative talent, that can take a lot of these generated things and create very novel experiences and ideas out of them. And then we have data from like 20-30 years of building all kinds of AAA games, casual games, mobile games, so kind of across the board. So it's definitely kind of a big piece of conversation. And I think the way that we think about it is that it is sort of AI assisted, or it's human assisted sort of work. So again, the creative is at the center of the loop, because without that, you can churn out something that can basically be like every other competitor could produce if you're just sort of producing what any large language model can produce. So it's really about how do we take the uniqueness of our talent and our IP and our data to use AI in a very novel way. So we're trying to go from where we have different teams that are masters in AI to sort of becoming a more AI native company where everybody speaks the language and it's sort of a core competency.
I love that. I love the collective approach, but with creator at the core. Nancy?
Sure. And similar to what Farah was mentioning, as I'm sure you all know with AWS, the SageMaker platform, different, recognition or texture or Kendra, right? Amazon is also not new to AI. However, myself working more in the core storage and also data storage spaces, if you think about ways that generative AI can, for example, speed your cyber recovery, right? Being able to actually serve as a co-pilot in different security operations center functions like incident response management. There's so much potential. And in fact, actually, not just within the AWS context, but that's actually an area where I've seen a ton of startup activities around, for example, not just how do you actually serve as a functional co-pilot, but actually how do you secure the data that's going into LLMs and hence the output of those LLMs.
Ambrish?
Yeah, similar to Farah and Nancy, I would say opportunities are everywhere. And there's probably any single product that we look across Meta, you can find opportunities how generative AI will be applicable to that. In the case of Meta, I would say monetization, where especially I focused on. I would say there are two things that we need to be extremely diligent about. How do we protect, grow consumer engagement, and how do we continue to grow the monetization through ads capability? And if you look at it, at the center of each of these is content. And when we apply the framework of how can we be assisting or augmenting or even automating many of the content creation capabilities, generative AI plays a very important role. So that's one element of it. Second scenario I can also talk about is that pretty much every company, small or large, business or consumer, they all have need for customer support or customer conversations. What are the ways we can be enabling those? Even in the past days when old instances of chatbot companies were shying away, now everyone is looking for help, how they can bring it to their workflows. They are either trying to figure out how they can build it internally. Can they justify the cost to commercialize it, or should they be hiring some external help? This is another way, in many ways, with Meta supporting our businesses, we look through the business messaging and so on. But in general, most of the organizations can benefit from these fundamental ways where generative AI can be very helpful.
What I'm hearing, I feel like there's a core to how your teams are approaching this. There's a creators being at the core. Amazon often takes more of a customer-centric approach. And I think, Ambrish, you were talking about a lot of the sort of what is the business outcome you want to achieve, and then how can you find the best way of moving the needle there. And I think it's really important, because Gen AI or not, right, working backwards from the problems that you're trying to solve, and then the solution, the technology is the ways, maybe accelerating the path or be able to elevate the level of solution you can deliver. And so from that high level picture, maybe moving to some specific examples, if you have any, one or two specific use cases you would like to share where, the application of the generative AI really has driven a step level change in the product experience or productivity or our business outcome. I will start with you, maybe Ambrish.
Sure. So Meta advertising is all about performance, and some of the recent product announcements that we have seen in the form of Meta's AI Sandbox or Meta's Advantage Plus product suite, they're all super fascinating. In the sense, Sandbox provides advertisers ability for creative generation or text variation or creative generation or even the image outcropping. But what I find even more exciting is how Meta's Advantage Plus product suite has been helpful. So some of the things that I find really interesting is Advantage Plus Creative, which essentially can adjust the ad creatives in a way that it personalizes what view is delivered to which user. That really resonates with them and they will respond to it. Similarly, Advantage Plus campaigns will automatically create over 150 different variations of creatives and will experiment with them, will test with them to make sure that advertisers are getting the best return on their ad spend. So these are really a step function change in how advertisers can expect to reach their target audience. And especially I find that these will be true enablers for the smaller businesses or SMB advertisers who earlier did not have the resources or the skill set to manage this level of experimentation or this level of optimization. But now with the generative AI capabilities, they all can have this access. So that I would say is one of the changes that I've been quite impressed with.
That's great. Nancy?
Yeah, so thanks, Ambrish, for sharing an example on the advertising side. So maybe I'll contrast with actually the recent investment that I made. We talked about incident response, right? So for those of you who may not be familiar with the sector, incident response is frankly a team that gets pummeled. Whenever data breaches happen, whenever intrusions detected within an enterprise, they're the team that's frankly paged or are on call. And so these folks often get thousands, if not more, right, different alerts from all of their different cloud resources, SaaS applications, you name it, right? And so this idea that I actually built Conviction around was being able to actually target specifically product security. So with the whole shift left of baking security into whatever you build, right, what if you could actually connect the alerts that you get from for example, various, detection tooling and actually connect that to contextual rich runbooks, right? So that's the idea. And of course, enabled with LLM that can self-learn based on every incident that comes in and actually connecting that to a contextual specific runbook that you can then automate with a human in the loop. So that's the general idea. Obviously, this team is very, very early, but just thinking about, again, the ability and the potential of generative AI to augment human operators and eventually to build sufficient awareness and contextual learnings so that when something comes in or even before something comes in, you can actually bake proactive feedback loops to make sure that those intrusions or those vulnerabilities never happen in the first place.
Fascinating. Amit mentioned earlier that how important data security is in this new, even more crucial in this new world. I love this example of using Gen AI to be more nimble and then react faster and potentially automate better the whole process. Farah, would you like to add a couple examples?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's on the developer efficiency side, using things like co-pilots for coding or getting access to information much more quickly when you have your own data trained on, GPT. I mean, those things are adding obviously a lot of value. I think when I think about game specific or things that we're doing that you show up in a game and creation, one recent example is we built this tech called voice to face. So what that does is takes recorded speech and then generates facial animations and lip sync animations from it very realistically. And so now you can generate, facial animations and lip sync in real time, as opposed to having a voice actor, having the time that it takes, the weeks or the months to actually go and iterate. And so the turnaround time for doing that stuff is so much faster. So your productivity goes kind of through the roof. The turnaround is great. And just being able to do this real time means that, you have animators have more fine-grained control of the end result, of the output, of the speaking style. And probably saved us like years of animation effort, depending on the complexity of the end product. And you can think of this as, we do a lot of sports games. So you can imagine, announcer voices. If you think of all of our role-playing RPG games, you can think of characters having conversations or going into battle. You can think of, games where, like Sims, for example, which has its own made-up language, that still kind of applies. So you can see how we can do this one time and then have the benefit kind of reaped across multiple games in multiple different ways. And I think that the biggest kind of, again, the performance gain, the turnaround time was, I think, the biggest benefit, because that lets you really focus on the quality of the output. Similarly, things like you can imagine with games, you have, lots of worlds, and we created a lot of these procedurally as well. And now, like, for example, I think about stadiums, if we can just kind of aligning from aerial imagery on posts and components in the ground, you can actually generate entire stadiums from scratch. And again, this type of creation speeds things up from months to weeks. So if you were launching a particular game with, let's say, 20 stadiums, now you can launch with 150. And so that's a really big transformational increase for us. So I think it's been, it's allowed us to 10x a lot in terms of the quality of the content that we generate, as well as the sheer amount of content that we can produce.
Wow, that is amazing. As an ex-gamer, that sounds exciting. But now as a mom of 2 teenage boys, I have mixed feelings about that. But I'm sure we're going to see a change of new games and new things coming. That's great. Well, with every new technology innovation in history, that comes new challenges, that brings new challenges. So I would like to maybe hear like what significant challenges you have encountered during this early stage of Gen AI and large language model adoption process, and how did you overcome them? This time, Nancy, we're going to start with you.
Sure. So I'm sure one thing that's top of mind for those of us who still work in large enterprises is really the confidentiality of data, right? I'm sure a lot of us saw articles where developers were actually feeding source code into ChatGPT and then realizing, oh, wait, that's not a private instance, right? So obviously don't do that. But I think more holistically, longer term, right? There's different questions around hallucinations, right? Catastrophic forgetting, for example, especially if you're training a model to answer hardcore questions or maybe be a significant factor in decision making, right? So those are things that, frankly, I think about, especially as it comes to the data privacy use cases as well as the data security use cases.
And do you have you had experiences so far in how to address those, how to try to overcome those?
So this is an area I would say is rich with a lot of startups right now in terms of, there's different approaches such as inserting a proxy in front of the API calls. I mean, that's just one example, but certainly I think the number or the amount of activity of founders trying to tackle this problem, I do think will up-level ourselves in terms of our maturity in thinking about how data goes into an LLM, how we can make sure that we avoid bias, for example, when generating responses from LLMs, and overall in terms of how developers work with LLMs.
Thank you. Farah?
I think in general, like the biggest challenge, being in a big company versus a startup is just the sheer size and scale and, different levels of technical awareness that people are at, right? So, kind of what Nancy was saying is just educating people, and what to do and what not to do. So here you have all these tools that can make people more efficient and can help them productivity-wise. But on the other hand, there's a lot of, the risk framework is ever evolving. And I think that was the number one challenge is, the tech was ahead of the legal and risk framework and kind of continues to stay ahead. And every day there's like a new model that's out, and then you have to go and legal has to look at, okay, what are the approved use cases? Which approved use cases can we allow this for which IP, non-IP? So, we deal with that, and it's, it's something that's very hard to stay on top of. I think the second thing is just how quickly things are evolving. I think this is one of those times that this is one of those rare times where we just kind of see this, flood of information, almost daily changes that are happening. And it's really impossible for any one person to keep on top of it. And so, a couple of things we've done is we've created a central program around AI/ML across the company. We've kind of come up with like 3 or 4 work streams that we think are the most critical, one around knowledge sharing, one around legal and risk framework, one around ongoing like kind of big projects and keeping track of them and giving everybody an update. And then just kind of thinking about how do we push this information out, building little playground sandboxes for the right cohorts to come in, test out things, and give feedback so we can quickly tune things. So for enterprise, our EA, Slack, GPT integration, for example, those type of things, or indemnity when it comes to using some of these kind of coding tools and things like that. So yeah, I think with big companies, there's this, you have to take everyone with you. And I think it's also about prioritization. So we really are prioritizing sort of their facing and then developer productivity use cases. But, there's data analyst use cases. There's, use cases for a finance team or PE, people experiences teams, legal teams. So we really have to work at it from here's our kind of year 1 plan and year 2 plan and year 3 plan. So it's pretty exciting though that like tech is moving so fast, but it is super hard to keep up with it.
Thank you. Amrish?
Yeah, lots of great insights from Nancy and Farah already. I will add one more from the little bit outside of the organization perspective in terms of driving adoption for these things, which is AI good enough? So for example, in case of advertising, often we are working with large brands who will have either very capable internal creatives team who will be generating these ads creatives or so, or they will be working with professional ad agencies whose full-time job has been to create these highly performant ad creatives. Now, bringing generative AI into this ecosystem also has a challenge that how do we win the trust? Is AI good enough? So the way most of the times we have seen success in providing capabilities where advertisers can gain side-by-side experience as a test, as they iterate, and they gain confidence that now they are ready to make a transition. So those have been some of the ways, and I can imagine that this will be applied to many such scenarios where we are hallucination and is AI good enough? What is our tolerance for error in different scenarios? Those kind of issues will need to be resolved and addressed.
That's very true. Well, switching gear to data, in Mike's kickoff, he mentioned how important data is to generate Gen AI apps. And Amit talked a little bit also about the importance of data. And Nancy, you just touched on this briefly as well. So drilling in there, obviously data is the key. I love to hear, how crucial in your build environment, in your product services, how crucial were the data quality and availability in the success of your AI initiatives, and how did you manage data-related challenges? Why don't we start with you, Farah?
I think when it comes to like data, player behavior data or consumer insights or metrics, I think, those relatively stay the same. I think where the bigger challenges is, do we have enough training data? Do we have the right, are we tagging them accurately? And we have our 2D assets, but then what about our 3D assets and things like textures and trees? And, the more of that data that we have well tagged and classified, the more that we can actually do with it. And so there is definitely has been an effort ongoing for many years to actually ingest and classify and tag that data. And so it becomes even more important. And so again, we take a use case approach of like, what type of data do we need to train like these speech models that I talked about for voice to face? What kind of data do we need to do like character generation, heads, eyes, hair, facial simulation. So there's a lot of these different types of use cases. And it's again about prioritization and, the cost benefit of like storage and all of that. But yeah, I mean, for us, the good thing is with large language models, you can do a lot with less data. So that's the good thing, that we can actually tune really high quality with less data. But being able to have good quality data tagged is of prime importance for any sort of, I think, AI problem.
Ambrish?
Yeah, I would say it's very crucial. I mean, data is the key, but let's unpack kind of similar to what Farah mentioned. It is, when we look at data essentially consists of what is the content as well as how, what is the annotation or labels and how it has been generated for those use cases. So that is an extremely important area that we need to pay attention to. Second important element also comes is what is the permissioning of this data? So especially in where we have to be kind of following the compliance and regulatory concerns, do we have enough user consent to use data for certain scenarios? So those also become very important. So those will be a couple of points that I would out from the data side. Thank
you. Nancy, is there anything you would like to add?
Yeah, so maybe I'll just add a quick line, given that Farah and Ambrish covered it quite well. Is if you're, let's say, a founder and you're trying to build models for proprietary domain-specific use cases, the availability and also the quality of your data is pretty crucial, because these models are voracious depending on what stage you choose to train them. So let's talk about, like, if you're trying to train a GPT-like model, a small set of high signal data can suffice. But if you can't afford situations like I talked about before, like catastrophic forgetting, then you will need a much larger volume data to train. And so this is an area where, going back to Amit's fireside chat, talking about partnering with a larger enterprise like GCP or Amazon or Azure, this is where their access to data can become really handy. So I'll give an example in the startup world as well. So a well-known WAF or web application firewall company recently tuned and built their own LLM because they were sitting on 10 plus years of intrusion data, right? So that's an example of where having large volumes of data can help you actually win out in a model race.
I like that you mentioned about partnership, because that's where I'm going next. Can each of you share examples, since we have a lot of founders and builders here, and I'm sure they're looking for partnership out there. So what are some of the examples where you have partnered externally to solve an AI product feature or technology gap or need in kind of delivering a full solution for your customers? I will start with Ambrish this time.
Yeah, I mean, AI is a system, and essentially partnerships can happen at every different levels in the stack, if you think about it. So for example, like Meta has been making a Llama 2 available through all the cloud providers, through Azure, AWS, and GCP. So partnerships are crucial there to drive adoption across the whole developer community. Similarly, we also heard the announcement earlier this year about Shutterstock and Meta partnering on the high quality image and tier annotations to essentially train the foundational models. So again, that every level in the stack, we can see partnerships can be valuable in terms of growing the value in the technology, driving the adoption across the ecosystem. So that's how we would look at.
Thank you, Nancy.
Yeah, so I'll give an example of actually, so before AWS, I worked at a company called Rubrik, that's also in the data protection space. And if you look at, for example, their announcement with Microsoft Azure OpenAI, as well as the Azure Sentinel, right? That's actually a very good description of the use cases that you can build as a startup company partnering with a larger enterprise. So again, some of those use cases fairly deep in security, like dynamically generating code when incidents are discovered, or being able to architect automatic workflows for incident responders, right, based on incoming alerts. So those are just examples of where you can take your core use case as a startup company, partner with a larger enterprise company to augment that, right? And I'm sure in the process, there will be lots of intelligence sharing or proprietary data sharing that you otherwise may not get access to.
Thank you, Farah.
I mean, in our case, we're basically leveraging the foundational models that exist, because there's a lot of this commodity models out there, and there's no need to go and kind of build them yourself, unless, the example Nancy gave of, if you have some really proprietary data and you can kind of go build something that's, outperforms other models, or those models don't exist. And then similarly on the infrastructure side, there's so much that's available. So, we just go to our kind of cloud service providers and leverage. So that's one way to partner with sort of industry and big tech. And then, look at the vertical or look at the space that you think that you want to build in, and then kind of think about how do you build something custom. Or again, for example, there's a startup that we're looking at and potentially piloting on, building quests. So in games, you can have anywhere, like the lifetime of a game, you can have thousands of quests that are generated. And so, and a large language model seems like a perfect sort of solution to actually go and generate some of these quests, you're in an arc in a game and now like, okay, go help me kind of win this battle, and then also let me rule over this kingdom, and how does that kind of happen? And so that would be something specific to us. We'd want to use our creatives, we'd want to use our data, but perhaps there's a startup out there that's specializing in this area, or like is really targeting kind of gaming quests, experiences, and narrative generation. And that would be a partnership that we would do, because while it's something that they can focus on, that one big broad area, we have to focus on the entire end-to-end building a game. And so if we can sort of partner with someone to accelerate this part of our pipeline, that's a great way to partner with kind of enterprises and startups. So kind of pick the specialization or the expertise where you either don't have the bandwidth or you don't have the expertise, and then that's a good way to partner with an external.
That's great. So many of the Gen AI startup companies are still very early in their journey, right? They're early, they're small, they're just getting started. So still on partnership, when you look at partner with these startups, what are you looking for? What are the quick sort of top 3 things you're looking for, so that the founders and builders here can be better prepared? And then any challenges you have seen in these partnerships? I'll start, Nancy.
Yeah, so putting on my old AWS hat for a second, right? If you look at the AWS data protection page, you'll notice several startup partners with whom we've had partnerships, joint go-to-markets, or actually demos that showcase an integration that we had. And so a couple of things, right? Using the decision framework is one, do you extend my current capabilities, right? Because one, right, it doesn't make sense if we duplicate each other's value add to the end customer. Number 2, right, are your capabilities sufficiently deep enough? So that goes into the moat that we often talk about as product people, right? So is your capabilities, as a moat, right, differentiate you from other startups that, let's say, as an AWS, I could potentially partner with? And number 3, of course, this goes into dedication as well. As a young startup, I get it, right? You don't have all the resources in the world. You can't just throw 10 engineers into an integration with a larger company. But if this is sufficiently critical enough to your business model, into how you're thinking about go to market, right, there will be dedicated heads that you will have from a startup side into building out that integration, which is something, of course, you shouldn't take lightly as a startup founder. So those are things that I would think about. Now, I think taking a step back into the broader startup landscape, which is, some as I'm looking at more startups these days, right, the LLM for X is not a defensible moat, right? Like as we all talked about, right? It comes back to really, do you have access to proprietary data that your competitors do not? And also from a business model perspective, is your company built such that you have a positive data loop? As in essentially, the more customers who use your product, the more data you're able to capture, and actually the better of a platform that you become.
Thank you. Super helpful. Farah?
Yeah, I mean, I guess jumping onto what Nancy said, looking at your proprietary data, and again, like I talked about our kind of our creatives, our talent, our IP, and our data, that's kind of our trifecta moat, right? And so where I would want to, partner, the narrative generation is a great example. Another example is, push button, go from script to scene. So like be able to go from a script to an entire cutscene with like props and characters and dialogue and lighting and things like that, right? There's a lot of these things that just don't exist. 3D, right? There's not a lot of models out there in the 3D space. We have a lot of 3D content. And so being able to partner with somebody in that space to generate realistic kind of 3D assets is another one. So yeah, I think when it comes to content creation for like entertainment, interactive experiences, there's kind of a whole set of things that's not existing yet. And so I think it's a great space for startups to kind of look at. And perhaps, maybe the addressable market they should look at isn't just gaming. They should look at it from interactive experiences in general, right? So what are all of the different kind of broadcast and other entertainment forms, and gaming is just one of them. And that could be a good way of thinking about it.
Yep. Ambrish, anything to add?
Yeah, I will just add it that having a focus area for especially for startups when resources are scarce and you can do only so much. So picking a niche area where you can really bring the value, which can be through proprietary data or proprietary domain understanding, which any of the large enterprises might not have the bandwidth or need to go that deep into. That's where startups can be really effective. So, but that will also require making sure that truly understand what is the end-to-end workflow where your solution is going to fit in. So having that deep understanding of overall end-to-end workflow in that, what is the role that your solution is playing, that will truly enable the success. Second thing I would add there is, which Amit also had highlighted in his conversation, that most of the other organizations are making sure that they stay compliant and they within any kind of regulatory boundaries. So when you're designing your solution, make sure that those considerations are taken into account first and foremost, because last thing any partnering organization would want to do is to increase their surface area for compliance and regulatory. So that will be another important thing that I would advise on.
Thank you. And I want to thank all of you for joining me for this panel, this session. It was a great conversation. I wish we have more time to discuss. And thank you for sharing what your teams are doing and offering advice to our audience. And to our audience, thank you for joining us. And I hope today's conversation gave you some good ideas about what problem space to focus on, how to differentiate your products and services, and then what kind of partnership you may want to form, even at an early stage. Again, virtual round of applause for my panelists. And don't forget, we have a week full of fun events and conversations ahead. And with that, I will pass it back to Mike.
Outstanding. Thank you so much, Wei and Farah, Nancy, Ambrish. What a great conversation. So deep and insightful, really, really helpful to founders.